Welcome to the Scrum Dynamics podcast. I'm your host, Neil Benson, and this is a special edition of the Scrum Dynamics podcast hosted from the Dynamics 365 User Group Summit EMEA. I'm in Dublin, Ireland this week, presenting on success with Scrum for Dynamics 365, and I thought I'd share it with you on the podcast. If you've heard of Scrum or you've used it in one of your projects and you want to dive deeper, then you're in the right spot. This episode is sponsored by Kingsway Soft. Kingsway Soft is the leading integration provider offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and really easy. Thousands of enterprise clients, including lots of our clients in Australia and from over 70 other countries around the world, rely on Kingsway Soft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and leverage their information assets. Kingsway Soft is the leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. So thanks to Kingsway Soft for sponsoring this episode of the Scrum Dynamics podcast on the CRM audio network. Welcome everyone to this session on success with Scrum for Dynamics 365. My name is Neil Benson. I'm the Director of Customer Engagement at KPMG in Australia. I actually grew up in Northern Ireland and I went to university in Scotland. I spent 12 years in London and then 3 years in Los Angeles before moving to Brisbane about 3 years ago. So sorry about my accent, it's pretty stuffed up. Any introverts in the room can follow my content using those channels on the left of the slide, and any extroverts can contact me using the methods on the right. The learning objectives for this session are: what is Scrum? What are the benefits of Scrum for Dynamics 365? And I want to share some of my lessons learned in the field from my Dynamics 365 projects over the last 10 years or so. I've been working with CRM software for about 20 years, with Dynamics CRM software since 2006 and with Scrum since 2009. I'm Scrum certified by the Scrum Alliance and scrum.org. So first of all, what is Scrum? Scrum is a framework within which we solve complex problems while delivering valuable products. It's important to know that Scrum is a framework, it's not a complete methodology. So you complement Scrum with technical practices for Dynamics 365 projects. And Scrum isn't really limited to software projects. Scrum is used in all kinds of industries to deliver results and improve how we work. So this is Scrum on a single slide. A person called a product owner has a vision for the software based on Microsoft Dynamics 365. Dynamics 365 is going to be implemented by a cross-functional self-organizing development team, and the Scrum team is coached by the Scrum Master. Everyone else with an interest in the project is a stakeholder. We capture requirements in a prioritized list called a product backlog, and we call the requirements product backlog items. In Scrum, Dynamics 365 is implemented in time-boxed iterations of work called a sprint, that are between 1 week and 1 month long. The first workshop is the sprint planning workshop, and the Scrum team decides which items to work on during the upcoming sprint, and that's the sprint backlog. During the sprint, the team syncs every day for 15 minutes, called the daily Scrum. And at the end of the sprint, they review their progress by demonstrating an increment of working software to the product owner and to the stakeholders in the sprint review workshop. Afterwards, at the sprint retrospective, they inspect and adapt their practices to improve their efficiency and effectiveness sprint over sprint. And at the end of each sprint, we should have a new product increment. Those are Dynamics 365 enhancements that the product owner could release into production. The organisation can keep the sprints going as long as the value being delivered in each increment is greater than the cost of the Scrum team. Underpinning all of this is empiricism. That's the scientific theory that we need to keep measuring, inspecting and adapting what we're doing. In fact, transparency, inspection and adaptation are the pillars of Scrum, while commitment, courage, focus and openness are its principles. Let's have a look at some of the benefits of Scrum for Dynamics 365. Let's have a look at the Scrum benefits for Dynamics customers from a product owner's point of view first of all. I think there's 5 or 6 of those. They are better Dynamics 365 software, faster release cadence, better return on investment, higher customer satisfaction, more visibility and confidence, and number 6, less risk. I think we get better Dynamics 365 software because Scrum results in better quality software that more closely meets your users' most valuable requirements. Secondly, we get a faster release cadence. You can deliver your first Dynamics 365 release much quicker with Scrum than a traditional project methodology. So benefits realization happens much earlier. Number 3, a better return on investment. Well, you get a higher return on investment because your benefits are being realized earlier and because Scrum projects cost 30 to 40% less than projects following traditional methodologies. You get higher customer satisfaction because Scrum embraces earlier feedback from your stakeholders and delivers features collaboratively with them, so there's greater involvement and hopefully that leads to greater satisfaction. You get more visibility and confidence because project sponsors and stakeholders have got more visibility of the progress in a Scrum project. They can come along to any of our meetings and hear the risks and issues that we're discussing, and that provides them with greater confidence. And I think you get less risk because of those frequent opportunities for inspection and adaptation that ensure we're building the right solution. And from the point of view of your Dynamics teams, there's another 3 or 4 benefits as well. Scrum teams have got more control because they're self-organising, so teams have more control over the work that they do and how they do it. They get empowered collaboration because Scrum encourages team members to work closely together and directly with users rather than working through a requirement specification document. We measure what matters in Scrum. The methods that Scrum teams use to estimate complexity, track their progress and make decisions are different and often more accurate than traditional methods on sequential projects. And they're just more fun. I find that people who work on Scrum teams are happier because their jobs are satisfying and rewarding. That notion of self-management puts decisions that would normally be made by a manager or someone else in the organisation into the Scrum team members' hands, and we have more fun on the project. Let's have a look at some of the lessons I've learned for some of my Scrum projects over the last couple of years. First of all, for product owners. A product owner needs to be a leader. That's somebody with a vision for how Dynamics is going to satisfy the business challenge. They need to have sufficient decision-making authority, and they need to have good people skills. They need to be a domain expert. That's in their industry, within the organisation. They need to understand the stakeholders and some of their politics, and they need to understand what the users need from the system as well. And they need to be somebody who's accountable. That means they're committed to the project, they're responsible, and one of the hardest factors of all is they're available. The good product owners are available 3 to 4 days a week on the project. So some of my lessons for product owners: use proxy product owners if you have to. So a proxy product owner is anybody who the product owner has delegated some of their responsibility to. That could be a business analyst who's going to help write those product backlog items. It could be a test analyst who's going to ensure that the finished work meets the acceptance criteria that the product owner has set. It could be a change manager who's going to help communicate change throughout the organisation. Or it could be a project analyst who's going to help with things like risks, budgets, resources, and managing issues. My second lesson is to never have a committee of product owners. If you have 2 product owners, you really should have 2 product backlogs and 2 Scrum teams. Trying to share the product owner role between 2 people really doesn't result in very successful projects. The development team. So we said earlier on, the development team is cross-functional and self-organising. So cross-functional means that they've got all the skills that they need to do their work. They're not relying on outside team members, and they've got those skills inside the project team if they need them. And they're self-organising. So they don't need a project manager or somebody else to assign work or to manage their work. They get on and do it themselves. In Scrum, a development team, everybody's called a developer inside that development team. That doesn't mean you're a .NET developer or a coder or you're a programmer. Anybody who's developing features in the product, and we call them a developer in Scrum. So take that, George Dubinsky. Successful development teams, I think, have got a couple of factors. They take collective ownership for the results. They should all feel responsible for the quality of the solution. And as far as possible, understand all of the system and get involved in all the activities. So they shouldn't be just specialising in one part of the system or another, and they should get involved in analysis, design, development, testing and deployment. Development teams have 3 to 9 committed developers. So I think any smaller than 3, and you're really too small to be cross-functional, you probably don't have all the skills in such a small team. And in a larger team, the communication and coordination just gets too hard and people get left behind and the Scrum team's too big at that stage. So 3 to 9 members, that's the sweet spot. I call them committed because the best Scrum teams are made up of people who aren't sharing their time across other projects. They're committed to this one and they're not working in any kind of business as usual or support tasks for prior projects. The Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is an expert in Scrum, there to serve the product owner, the development team and the organisation by helping everybody to understand and embrace and apply Scrum to your Dynamics 365 project. So that person needs to be an expert in Scrum. I don't think you can take a 2-day Scrum training course and be a Scrum Master and come back and coach a Scrum team. You probably need to have spent a year or 2 working in a Scrum team before you can be a Scrum Master. They're a great coach. So great coaches ask leading questions instead of providing definitive answers. And they know when to hold the team's hand and when to let them run free. They've got great people skills and they're good at resolving interpersonal conflict. My advice here is to hire an expert if it's your first Scrum team or first Scrum project. Don't send one of your Scrum project managers off on a course. Hire somebody with experience and have them coach your team's first project. You can, if you need to, combine the Scrum Master and developer roles on a smaller team, but please don't try and combine the product owner and Scrum Master roles in a single person. There needs to be a natural tension between the product owner and the dev team to get the most out of Scrum. And there needs to be complete trust between the dev team and the Scrum Master. So it's best to keep those roles separate. Stakeholders. Stakeholders are everybody else. That could be the project sponsor, it could be a head of a department, anybody who's got an interest in the project. They provide the requirements into your product backlog, and they can observe your Scrum events, particularly the sprint review. We want to invite them along to that. And sometimes they stand in and observe our daily Scrums, but they should not be active participants except for the sprint review. Be transparent with your stakeholders. Make your product and sprint backlogs visible. If they're electronic, make sure everybody else has got a login for those systems. Encourage questions and stimulate feedback. Demonstrate your progress and be open and honest about any issues or risks that you're facing or anything that's blocking progress. One of the stakeholders is probably the right person to help you unblock that impediment. Don't let stakeholders control the product owner. That product owner, like I said earlier, needs to be somebody with sufficient decision-making authority. If they keep having to go back to a senior stakeholder to get decisions, then it's a good sign that the product owner probably isn't the right person. Stakeholders can influence and lobby, they can request features, but if they're controlling the product owner and demanding features, then again, you've got the wrong person in the... Next, we're going to take a look at deliverables. There are 3 deliverables in Scrum. The product backlog is the first one, and it's the list of all the possible requirements. Those requirements are prioritized only by the product owner and nobody else. Technical practices that complement Scrum. I use user stories and user story mapping for describing our requirements and getting a big picture of the system. And then I use story points and planning poker for estimation and planning. I don't recommend use cases. They're too long and too technical, or writing or publishing requirement specifications. That's a throwback to a waterfall mentality. We want the product backlog to be agile, meaning it can change often, and that can't happen when we have to write everything down and publish it and get it signed off. The sprint backlog is the second Scrum deliverable. It's a slice of work that the team is committed to delivering in our sprint. It's a subset of the product backlog with a plan for how the work's going to get done. Usually we've got some design ideas, we've maybe got a few tasks outlined, and that sprint backlog is summarized by a sprint goal. That's the overarching goal for the sprint that we're going to try and achieve. My advice here from lessons learned on my projects is to be negotiable about the sprint backlog with the product owner. We'll cover that a little bit more later on. That's during the sprint review event. But commit to it for the duration of the sprint and resist the temptation to change it. That's really up to the product owner to try and make that commitment. The team's going to commit to delivering all of the items in the sprint. The product owner's got to commit to not changing it. And the development team gets to decide which items they're going to work on and how those are going to be delivered. Neither the product owner, the Scrum Master, or any stakeholder should be deciding exactly what goes into the sprint backlog or how it's going to get delivered or what the estimate should be for each of those items. And the last deliverable in a sprint is the product increment. So the product increment is a set of enhanced features, of Dynamics 365 features that are ready to release into production. My advice, I use 2 types of solutions. I call them item solutions and release solutions. An item solution is a solution package in Dynamics 365 that contains just the solution components required to meet one single requirement. That could be just a single field, or it could be a form or a view or a work. A release solution then is a combination of all the item solutions that have been successfully tested, and it packages them up ready for deployment into production. You can use managed or unmanaged solutions depending upon your preferences, and your product increment needs to be ready to release into production. You don't have to release it into production at the end of every sprint, but I definitely encourage it. And that's up to your product owner when they want to do those releases. So let's take a look at Scrum's events. There's 5 events that we're going to cover off this afternoon. First of those is a sprint. So a sprint is a time-boxed iteration of work when we turn ideas into features. We do all the analysis, design, development, integration, testing and deployment in every sprint. The Scrum Guide says a sprint is between a week and a month long. My advice, based on trying lots of different durations, is either use 2-week or 3-week sprints. 1 week can work well for short projects like proof of concept projects where you need rapid feedback. 4 weeks or 1 month long sprints just take too long to get ideas into production. The time taken between an idea and the working software is too great. In 2 or 3 week sprints, my teams concentrate their development effort during the first 2/3 or so, and the last third of the sprint we're testing, documenting and deploying our sprint into production. And we're also researching and analysing items from the product backlog that we're going to start delivering in the next sprint. Finally, on sprints, don't use special sprints. I'm not a big fan of sprint zero or hardening sprints or testing sprints or integration sprints. They're all just BS. We need to be delivering working software in every single sprint. I dare you, try it. Sprint planning is the second event. Sprint planning is the first big event in every sprint. And it really kicks off the sprint. For a 2 or 3 week sprint, it's probably a 2 or 3 hour long meeting. Its purpose is to determine our sprint backlog. I encourage a practice called story time before sprint planning. Story time are short workshops between the product owner, the dev team and stakeholders to analyse and refine some of the high priority requirements. Just enough so the dev team can estimate them. Those workshops can take place in the sprint before our sprint planning workshop. Be negotiable in sprint planning. The dev team needs to trust the product owner to prioritise the most valuable items, and the product owner needs to trust the dev team when it selects which of those high priority items to work on. The daily scrum. So it's a 15-minute daily sync for the dev team to catch up with each other and find out what they managed to work on yesterday, what they're delivering today, and any impediments that are in their way. My advice is meet at the same time and same place every day. Ideally, you're working as a physical team, and that's you're in a room somewhere, in a project room, but it might be on the phone. And it's not a status report for the Scrum Master. It's not a status report for the product owner or any of the other stakeholders. Those people are welcome to participate, and the dev team needs to make sure that they get what they need from that daily Scrum. Towards the end of the sprint, we have the sprint review meeting. So it's a critical Scrum event for inspection. So we inspect the product increment in every sprint review, and then we adapt the product backlog in response to the feedback that we get. It's usually 2 to 3 hours if you're running 2 to 3 week sprints. Invite your stakeholders along. Their feedback is vital. Set up a recurring meeting in their calendar so everybody knows where it is and when it is. Never surprise your product owner in the sprint review. Demo features that are completed during the sprint if you can. You don't need to wait until the sprint review meeting. And it's ideal if the product owner can actually demo those features to the stakeholders. That's a good sign that the product owner has accepted them and that the product owner feels that they're finished. And the sprint review should take the team less than an hour to prepare for. I remember some of my early sprint reviews, we'd spend like half a day preparing demo scripts and pushing stuff into a demo environment. It should really just take a few minutes, maybe an hour to prepare a run sheet and make sure the team knows who's going to demonstrate what to this. The sprint retrospective. This is the last meeting in each sprint. I think it's usually a short meeting. I try and keep it about an hour. And the purpose of the sprint retrospective is to inspect and adapt your processes, how you're applying Scrum to your Dynamics 365 project. My advice, I like to make it a walking meeting, maybe even a lunchtime meeting, get out and have a picnic. But don't just sit around the table and have another boring meeting. Make sure you focus on the process, not the people. So we want to talk about, for example, test-driven development, not how Batman needs to get his act in gear and regression test always work. Take 1 or 2 ideas from the sprint retrospective and try applying those in the next sprint. Try not to change 10 things about the way that you work. Just take 1 or 2 of the best ideas and apply those in the next sprint. And there's lots of different sprint retrospective workshop formats. Try changing the format from sprint to sprint to keep your retros fresh. So last section in this presentation, I wanted to talk about a case study of an old project of mine at Premier Medical Group. This is actually my first Scrum project back in 2009, so it holds a pretty special place in my heart. So Premier Medical Group, they diagnose the injuries of people who've been involved in an accident. That's really to support that person's insurance claim. Essentially what they do is they chase ambulance chasers. So this is Debbie. She's the operations director at Premier Medical Group. And her job is to chase the operations staff, who chase the doctors, who chase the lawyers, who chase the ambulances, who chase the casualties. Debbie sent my consulting company a request for a proposal for a CRM system to replace an insurance-specific workflow system that wasn't meeting her requirements. The specification was only about 30 pages long, and my initial estimate for the implementation was about 900 days of effort. to implement Dynamics CRM. This is CRM 4.0 back in the day, for about 300 users using the wonderful official Microsoft Dynamics SureStep sequential methodology. The analysis and design phase took about 8 weeks. I remember Dan and I working some late nights on it, trying to get the final solution specification published. That was about 600 pages of requirements and design documents. Debbie wasn't really that happy with the document though. She thought it was filled with jargon, technical jargon about Dynamics CRM. She thought some of the requirements were a little ambiguous, and she didn't, although it was 600 pages long, she thought there were some bits that could possibly be missing. So she wasn't confident that the specification was right at all. But it was too long. So go figure. Bits missing, but it's too long. And she thought it was going to take too long to see working software. I think we estimated about 18 months before the project would be finished, and the last 3 or 4 months of that would be spent in testing. So she was going to have to wait 12, 14, 15 months before seeing any working software. She wanted us to be more agile. And given Debbie's feedback, I thought that Scrum might be a much better approach. It would provide her with prototype software every couple of weeks. It would give her control over the priorities and the scope and the timeline and the budget. So it put her in the driving seat. So we formed our Scrum project team, and 39 sprints later, we delivered quite a lot. We had lots and lots of CRM releases. We built a custom portal before Dynamics Portals was available back in the day. And we delivered also a custom offline client, so doctors could sync all the patient data and their medical files onto their computer and run their clinics without an internet connection. Less than a year after our first major release into production, Premier Medical Group was acquired by Capita, and proudly one of their reasons that their biggest investor in EMEA was able to attract interest from the blue chip Capita was because of PMG's fully integrated IT-led medical reporting system, which is Dynamics CRM. 4 lessons I learned from the Premier Medical Group project. Number 1, find a fantastic product owner. I was really lucky to have had Debbie as a product owner. As the operations director, she's senior enough to make decisions on behalf of the whole business and represent the board of directors. She was trusted by the rest of the board, and she really knew the business back to back. Our only challenge was Debbie's availability, and we worked through a business analyst, Ben Rolls, that Debbie trusted to make lots of day-to-day decisions for her. So lesson number 1, find a fantastic product owner. Learn how to pitch Scrum. I learned the hard way. After Debbie had agreed that we switched to Scrum and ditched that big requirement specification, I was invited to pitch Premier Medical's board of directors, which included an investor from EMEA Capital. So he asked a perfectly reasonable question, and I provided the craziest answer that it makes me cringe now when I think about it, but I'll share it with you so you can avoid my mistake. His question was, if we're no longer going to use the requirement specification to test that you've completed the work, how will we know when you're done? So I've heard similar questions since then from lots of other executives and procurement people especially. They're used to knowing exactly what they're going to get before the work starts. They're not used to a contract that says, oh, we're just going to send an awesome team and we'll do fantastic work that you'll prioritize. So please learn how to respond to that question. Don't use my response, which was, you'll know we're done when you've run out of money. Number 3, use a physical Scrum board. Our Scrum Master in the Premier Medical Group project was Paul Fox. So my company, Increase CRM, partnered up with a bigger Microsoft partner who had more experience with Scrum. So Paul Fox, he encouraged us to get together in a physical room. He stuck up some sheets of dry erase whiteboard film to protect the room's wall, and he taught us how to manage all of our product backlog items on sticky notes that we moved from left to right across the Scrum board as those items were completed. I've used physical Scrum boards on several projects, and even on my biggest Scrum project today, we're using a physical Scrum board as well as tracking items in a requirements management system. You can use Jira or Visual Studio Team Services. If you're co-located, highly recommend using a physical Scrum board. And lastly, hire an experienced Scrum Master. So my small Microsoft consultancy at the time, Increase CRM, we'd no experience with Scrum. I'd read a few articles about it, but I certainly wasn't a Scrum Master. So we partnered with Cyber UK. They provided Paul Fox as our Scrum Master. Paul wasn't a Microsoft CRM expert, but he was a really talented coach who not only helped us learn the mechanics of Scrum's events and so on, but he was able to help us absorb and easily apply Scrum theory and its principles of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. If you don't really understand and internalize the pillars and principles of Scrum, you won't really be able to apply those events and hit those deliverables. So if your organization or team doesn't have experience with Scrum, you'll be 10 times, maybe 100 times more effective if you go and hire an experienced Scrum Master. I've got an online course if you think that helps, but great coaching from a Scrum Master who's been there before is even better. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody on the PMG CRM project. Big thanks to Debbie Craig and the board of directors, Jason Powell, who's the CEO, Harry Brunya, who's the chairman, Toshe Ramalingan from Nomura, and the cyber team, especially Paul Fox, and the awesome team at CRM, especially Dan and Weiche. So that's it from me. Thanks very much for listening, everybody. I hope you've got something out of that session today. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer a few questions now. Otherwise, I'm just about to head to the Celt Bar. It's 81 Talbot Street, which is a short walk from here. You're welcome to come along and buy a pint of Guinness and answer all your Scrum questions there. Thanks very much. So that's it for another Microsoft Dynamics 365 User Group Summit. Thanks very much to Tony Stein and all the crew at Dynamics Communities for throwing on another wonderful conference. It was really good fun. Dublin is like a home city for me, so it was great to come back to Ireland and meet lots of people. Met lots of people who listen to the podcast and have taken the Scrum 365 training course. So great to see all of you and my MVP friends. To everybody here, safe travels home. Have a safe trip. Bye. Our mission is to have every Microsoft Dynamics 365 project succeed using Scrum. If you'd like to learn more about Scrum and become a certified professional Scrum Master, visit crm.audio/Scrum Dynamics to get discounted access to the Introduction to Scrum from Microsoft Dynamics 365 course. The course features videos, worksheets, quizzes, and a practice assessment for the Professional Scrum Master certification exam. It covers the theory of Scrum, its events, roles, and deliverables, as well as lessons learned through Scrum for Dynamics CRM case study projects. CRM Audio podcast listeners can get discounted access by visiting crm.audio/Scrum Dynamics.